After playing HMAS Perth, the reward ship for participating in the Halloween event and grinding out all that temporary currency, I thought to myself, we've had a couple ships in the past where you had to participate in events and grind out currency in order to purchase them, and the Lenin was the very first of those ships. The Lenin is, of course, the Tier 7 premium Soviet battleship, one of the most heavily armored battleships at Tier 7, or really in the game. The thing is practically invulnerable to HE spam, having like 50mm armor plating along its deck, extremely thick side armor, upper belt armor, citadel armor, all that stuff. It does have a 32mm bow, and then it has such a minimal amount of superstructure that really it can withstand the withering hail of high explosive spam better than most battleships at Tier 7, and it's just incredibly powerful. All of its firepower is, of course, concentrated on the front of the ship, which means it's one of the few battleships out there that's actually suited to pushing in and bow tanking. This is not true of most battleships, although most people play battleships that way. I wanted to show you a game where you can actually do that effectively. And we're going to have quite an effective game in the Lenin, wherein we're just going to rampage straight through the enemy team without them being able to take us out. The only weakness on the Lenin is that its citadel is incredibly exposed, so if you give too much broadside, you will be punished, and you can potentially be dev-struck in one shot. So, there is risk to it when you're going to move up and bow tank. If you're going to do it, certainly you don't want to put yourself in a position where the enemy ships have access to your broadside. But even if you are going to move into a position to bow tank the enemy team, you still want to move into places on the map where you can access their broadsides. You don't just have to push straight in. So glancing at the map, we see that the Iowa is pushing forward, a destroyer is pushing into this Alpha Cap directly in front of us, and then the rest of the enemy team appears to pretty much be in the middle of the map or over near the Delta Cap. So we shouldn't have too much to worry about. We can continue to push out. We've citadeled the Iowa once. Can we do it again? No, not quite, but we do get quite a juicy salvo on his broadside anyway, despite the lack of citadels, and we're already up to 42,000 damage done. These guns hit like freight trains, and you see there the Iowa's return shot. No danger whatsoever. We're very well angled here, and even his 16-inch American armor piercing cannot pierce the angled armor of the Soviet battleship Lenin. The Iowa is under a withering hail of fire from my teammates. Doesn't look like he's going to be surviving too much longer, and we've managed to secure the Alpha Cap. So now we can turn to the left, and we can start squaring off against all three of those ships in the center. Obviously, they've noticed us, and they have taken a chunk of our health, but that's okay. We'll just pop the first repair party. Spotted by a plane, not great. The smokescreen appears to be concealing my enemies there, but there is an Odin giving flat broadside. His HE, by the way, is good enough to penetrate our armor because it's German. So he does get a little bit of a chunk on us there, and I think that could be a British cruiser of some kind trying to farm us, judging by the armor-piercing spam and the smoke screen. The cruiser is now out of the smoke screen. All three of these ships are revealed to me, and with the Iowa no longer floating, I have no issues with giving my broadside to the north side of the map. Right now, my primary focus is going to be on Odin, because he is, of course, a German battleship with torpedoes, and if I allow him to get too close to me, well, then he might sink some torpedoes into my hull, and that is certainly going to take down the Lenin a little bit better than anything else. The Odin is a very heavily armored ship, though, and he does have at least probably 20,000 hit points left, if I had to guess. Pushing straight bow into us, looks like he's already launched some torpedoes, but they didn't have the range. Right now, we're going to try to take out his guns, if possible, or get damaging shots into his superstructure. One thing I found about the Lenin is that the shell arcs are so very flat that it seems almost to me like you have to aim a little bit higher than you would on other battleships with less flat shell arcs when you're at point blank range like this and you're trying to put the shells into the superstructure. There we get the Odin's guns. He's got no HP left. He's going to turn to try to get the torpedoes off, but too little too late. One of our teammates helps us out and finishes off the Odin. Now we've got a York in front of us. York, of course, has torpedoes, so that's something we'll want to keep in mind. It's got a 6-kilometer range, but I guess it's dead, so maybe it doesn't so much matter. Now we can secure this cap, and we've more or less cleared out the entire enemy team on 2/3 of the map. The rest of the enemy team is concentrated over there to the east by Charlie and Bravo. A Georgia is moving into Charlie, having circled the perimeter of the map. He's now getting close to our spawn. He's going to find that this is not the best place for him to go. And to be fair, my team has only lost 1 ship, whereas the enemy team has lost 4. It's a little bit of a blowout game, I'd say, and not normally a game I'd like to necessarily show on the channel because I don't really care to watch blowout games or play them. Nevertheless, the Lenin is just such a potent force of nature that driving through the enemy team like this is quite fun. We've lost a fair amount of hit points along the way, of course. We're a little bit below half health right now, but we have a repair party about to come off of cooldown that will allow us to get up to at least half health. And now we're in range to start shooting at the Reds. We take our first shot at the Cleveland. Of course, since the Lenin is a Soviet battleship, it does get the Soviet battleship dispersion pattern, where at longer ranges the dispersion is questionable at best, and at closer ranges it can be like laser accurate. So that's the goal right now, is to get into closer range to these enemy ships. And now the withering hail of Cleveland spam is about to begin, but the good news is that the Cleveland, so long as his shells hit the center of the ship and don't hit the superstructure, are just going to shatter, and the only damage he's going to be able to rely on is fire damage. The Cleveland can only penetrate the Lenin's bow and stern plating with its high explosive, along with the superstructure, if it's running equilibrium of power. Of course, if it's not running equilibrium of power, then things aren't going to go super well for the Cleveland. It's not going to be able to see a lot of damage, but as we continue to approach him, our dispersion is going to improve. It's just unfortunate we didn't place our shot in the center of his ship there, otherwise that could have been a dev struck. But since it hit near the back, it was a decent chunk of armor-piercing damage, but not quite enough to take the Cleveland out. It looks like he's adjusted his aim now, and he's switching to the armor-piercing, getting some penetrations into the superstructure. He's slightly angled now, and much closer. There's no way we could possibly miss on this one. We're pretty confident, and we do take him out, hitting his citadel there. That just leaves the King George and the enemy destroyer, who was last spotted in our spawn. We don't have to worry about the enemy destroyer so much, but the King George is a decent threat to the Lenin. The Lenin does have one weakness. If you're going to try to shoot armor-piercing at it in your battleship, you're going to fail all day because you're never going to penetrate the armor unless you're something like a Musashi where you can overmatch the Lenin's bow. But if you are a high-explosive spamming battleship like the King George or the Nelson, maybe the Vanguard, any of those battleships with excellent high-explosive shells, well, that is the ultimate weakness of the Lenin. You can angle this fantastic Soviet armor against armor-piercing shells, but obviously you can't angle against high explosive. And there we get the high caliber medal with our shot on the King George. He's hiding behind this island, I suppose, trying to preserve his hit points, as if the red team has any chance of winning this game. Not likely, given that they only have the one destroyer in the King George, so my thought process here was, do I go around the left of the island, or do I go around the right of the island? I would like to dev strike this King George if possible. We have done 133,000 damage and gotten the high caliber medal in this game, and I'd like to buff the numbers just a little bit. King George is mostly stopped there. Looks like he's going forward. He's wary of the Lenin. He does not actually want to take these armor-piercing shells, and I suppose who can blame him? But we're quickly approaching 1,000 points, and this is a guaranteed win. If you have the Lenin, I highly recommend playing it more. It can be a very relaxing experience. In some ways, I think this might be a bit of an overpowered battleship. The armor is just maybe a little bit too good. That's not discounting the weakness of the broadside armor, but generally that's a weakness on every single battleship known to man. So I don't know that it's necessarily a weakness that justifies just how well armored and tanky this battleship is, but I'm not going to complain. It's a rare enough ship, and it is a fun experience. We are able to overmatch the King George's bow there, by the way, to bring our damage total up to nearly 150,000 damage done, which is a nice way to end the game. And of course, we end top of the leaderboard with over 2,000 base XP, having just rampaged through the enemy team in the Lenin. That's nearly 3,000 base XP. And yeah, there you have it. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.